Here's a question. What's the most radical thing a person can say? We usually imagine it's something loud, a protest, a declaration, something with fire in it. But some of the most radical words ever spoken are quiet. So quiet that we read right past them and mistake them for something sweet and small. There's a line in the Bible that gets read at weddings all the time. You may have heard it. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. It sounds tender, romantic even. We put it on cards. But here's the thing. Those words were never spoken between two people in love. They were spoken by a widow to her mother-in-law. And when you understand who was speaking and who she was, what she was giving up, what she was crossing over, and what it actually cost her, you realize those gentle words might be some of the most defiant, boundary-shattering words in the entire Bible. Welcome to Now It Makes Sense. I'm Dr. William Attaway. This is the show where we go back into the ancient world to recover what these stories meant then so they can make sense now. No background required, no prior faith assumed. Just honest questions and stories deeper than you were told. Let me set up the story. There's a famine in Israel, and a family, a husband, a wife named Naomi, and their two sons, they leave their hometown of Bethlehem, and they go to find food in a neighboring country. That country is Moab. While they're there, the two sons marry local women, Moabite women. One of them is named Ruth. And then tragedy lands hard. The husband dies. Then both sons die. And you're left with three widows, Naomi and her two foreign daughters-in-law. In the ancient world, that was about as vulnerable as a person could be. No husband, no sons, no income, no protection. A widow with no men in her family was often one step from destitution. So Naomi decides to go home to Bethlehem. And she tells her two daughters-in-law to go back to their own mothers, their own people, their own gods. Start over, she says. Find new husbands. There's nothing for you with me. One of them, after much weeping, agrees. She goes back. And honestly, that was the sensible thing to do. No one would fault her. But Ruth won't go. And that's when she says it. Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. She chooses to bind herself to this older woman, to a foreign land, to a future with no husband and no security in sight. Now, to feel how radical that is, you need to know two things the original audience knew instantly. And we've lost both of them. Here's the first thing. Ruth was a Moabite. And the history between Israel and Moab was bad. This was not a friendly neighboring country. The bad blood went all the way back. According to the Israelites' own scriptures, the Moabites had refused to help Israel in a desperate moment, had hired a prophet to curse them, and had lured them into betrayal. Those were old, deep wounds. It went so deep, in fact, that there was actually a line in Israel's law in the book of Deuteronomy that said a Moabite was not to be admitted into the assembly of the Lord, even down to the 10th generation. Now, scholars debate exactly how that law was applied and to whom, but the reputation was unmistakable. To an Israelite ear, Moabite was not a neutral word. It carried suspicion, distance, the sense of an outsider that you don't trust and you don't mix with. And there's a second layer, even older. The Moabites, according to Genesis, trace their origins back to a deeply shameful story, a story of incest, of Lot and his daughters after the destruction of Sodom. So the very name Moab carried for an ancient Israelite an echo of scandal at its very core. So now put yourself back in Bethlehem when Naomi walks back into town after all those years away, and beside her is a Moabite woman. People would have stared. People would have whispered. She brought one of them. Ruth isn't just an immigrant. She's an immigrant from the one place loaded with the most baggage. And she walks into Bethlehem carrying all of it. So now, hear her words again. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. And feel the weight. She's not saying something sweet. She's crossing a border that her world said should not be crossed. She's leaving behind her own people, her own gods, her own identity, and binding herself to a people who, by all rights, should look at her with suspicion. She's walking toward the prejudice, not away from it, for the sake of one grieving woman who has nothing to offer her in return. That's not romantic, my friends. That's radical. That's a person stepping over one of the highest walls her culture had built and doing it out of pure, stubborn loyalty. Now, here's the second thing the original audience understood that we don't. And it's the machinery that drives the whole rest of the story. Without it, the back half of the book of Ruth feels like a strange, slow series of customs. But with it, it is a brilliant piece of architecture. It comes down to two ancient practices, gleaning and the kinsman redeemer. Let's take gleaning first. In Israelite law, when you harvested your field, you were not allowed to harvest the corners, and you weren't allowed to go back for what you dropped. You had to leave it on purpose for the poor, the foreigner, the widow, and the orphan to come and gather. It was a built-in provision, a way the law made sure the most vulnerable people in society could eat with dignity, gathering food with their own hands rather than begging for it. So that's what Ruth does. She's poor. She's a widow. She's a foreigner. She checks these boxes. She goes out to glean in the fields to keep herself and Naomi alive. And the field she ends up in belongs to a man named Boaz. Now, here's the second practice, the big one, the kinsman redeemer. In ancient Israel, the family was everything. It was your security, your safety net, your identity, your survival. And so the law had a beautiful provision for when a family was on the brink. A near relative could step in and redeem. The Hebrew word is goel. A goel, a kinsman redeemer, was a relative who had both the right and the responsibility to rescue family members in trouble. If a relative fell into poverty and had to sell off the family land, the redeemer could buy it back so that it stayed in the family. If a relative was forced into servitude, the redeemer could buy their freedom. The redeemer was the one who used his own resources to restore a family member who couldn't save themselves. And it could extend even farther to carrying on the family line of a relative who had died, so that his name and his place in the community would not be erased. So now, watch the story snap into focus. Naomi realizes that Boaz, this kind landowner whose field Ruth has been gleaning in, she realizes he's a relative, which means he's a candidate to be a goel. a kinsman redeemer, a man who could step in and restore this broken little family. And what follows is a scene that, if you don't understand the custom, looks almost bizarre. But if you do, it's stunning. Naomi sends Ruth at night to the threshing floor where Boaz is sleeping after the harvest. And Ruth, following Naomi's instructions, lies down at his feet and waits. When he wakes, startled, she says something remarkable. She asks him to spread the corner of his garment over her. And she names it. She says, "For you are a redeemer." This is not what it can look like to modern eyes. This is Ruth, the vulnerable foreign widow, formally, courageously asking Boaz to do the Redeemer's duty, to step in, to restore her and Naomi. She's essentially proposing that he take up the role of Goel and bring this family back from the edge. Boaz is moved. He praises her, but he's also a man of integrity. And he tells her there's a complication. There's actually a closer relative, a man with a prior claim to the Redeemer's role. The right thing has to be done in the right order. So the next day, Boaz goes to the city gate, which was the ancient world's courthouse. This was the place where legal business was done in front of witnesses. And he lays out the situation to that nearer relative. There's land belonging to Naomi's family to be redeemed. And along with it comes the responsibility to care for Ruth and carry on the family line. The nearer relative says, no, it's too costly. It would complicate his own inheritance. So he steps aside publicly and gives up his claim, which then clears the way for Boaz. And Boaz, in front of the elders and the witnesses at the gate, declares that he will redeem it all, the land and Ruth and the future of this family. He uses his own resources, takes on the cost, and restores what was broken. And here's the line that would have made the original audience gasp. This story, this quiet story about a foreign widow and a generous landowner, ends with a genealogy. Ruth and Boaz have a son, and that son becomes the grandfather of a boy named David, King David, the greatest king in Israel's history. And who would later come in the line of David? Jesus, the Messiah. Which means David, the most celebrated king that Israel ever had, just a few generations back, had a Moabite great-grandmother. And the genealogy of Jesus includes Ruth, a foreigner, an outsider from the nation with the worst reputation, a woman who, by the strict letter of the prejudice, should never have belonged. But she sits at the root of the royal family tree. The story took the ultimate outsider and placed her at the very center of the people's identity. Do you see what knowing the world does to this book? Without the context, Ruth is a gentle tale that we read at weddings. With it, Ruth is a quiet act of defiance against prejudice. A story about loyalty that crosses every line, about a law designed to protect the vulnerable, about a redeemer who pays the price to restore people who can't restore themselves, and about a God who again and again in these scriptures seems to delight in pulling the outsider in from the margins and placing them at the heart of the story. Those quiet words at the beginning, "Your people will be my people," weren't sweet nothings. They were the bravest thing she could have said. And they changed everything that came after. Now it makes sense. Next week, we're going to step back and ask the question underneath this whole show. Why is the Bible so much harder to read than we think it should be? And what can we actually do about it? Wherever you come from, whatever your story, however much of an outsider you've ever felt, you're welcome here. God can handle your questions. This is the place for them.